So yeah, this is the Pass Cloud virtual chapter. The presentation tonight is going to be successfully migrating existing databases to Azure SQL Database with John Sterrett. Before we get started here, I do have a couple of slides I want to go over to just cover up some housekeeping kind of things. Over the next few weeks, we do have a few more webcasts coming up. We got Azure SQL Databases for the production DB coming up next week, Azure Data Catalog on the 21st, and Azure Active Directory on the 28th, followed by Software as a Service Solutions with Data Factory on September 14th. We do have some openings there. You notice there is quite a bit of a jump between July 28th and September 14th, so we are looking for additional presentations to start filling in some of the gaps in our schedule. We are going to be making a change from 7 p.m. Central Time, which is where we are right now, to doing more presentations around noon Central. That's just basically because I've had a few requests for that time change. From a PASS community news perspective, we do have a few things to announce. There is the PASS Summit coming up here in just a couple months, actually more like 4 months. The code that you want to use if you're going to be looking for a discount on your registration is VC15 CHB6. That gets you a $150 discount on your registration if you haven't registered already. And the PASS Summit is pretty much the premier conference for technical data professionals. This virtual chapter is one of many virtual chapters that the PASS organization promotes. We've got virtual chapters that go between different disciplines like big data and data science. There are some that are dedicated to specific languages so that people can listen to presentations and receive education in their native language. So there's Spanish, Russian, Portuguese. Or there's some people that just have nothing better to do on a Saturday night than see a presentation on some technology. So there's also the Saturday Night SQL virtual chapter. There are a lot of these virtual chapters that are out there. Pretty much if you are looking for something, there's a good chance that there is either something coming up on the schedule on one of these or within the back catalog of YouTube videos that most of the chapters are putting up with past presentations. Some examples of some of the things that are coming up. DBA Fundamentals has 3 skills every junior DBA must know. The Women in Technology is covering MDX Basics. The PowerShell is covering PowerShell Go with the Flow. And the Persian one is having a Power BI presentation that's coming up here in just a few weeks. With all of these, a lot of the presentations that you see at PASS Virtual Chapters are also at SQL Saturdays. If you're not familiar with SQL Saturday is a free Saturday training event that is hosted by members of the SQL Server community. These are throughout the United States and across the world. So we've got some coming up here in Sioux Falls. There's one coming up in Manchester, Sao Paulo, Bangladesh. These come up all the time, and they're free training events that people can go to and see presentations very similar to what you see at virtual chapters and the PASS Summit. If you are looking to volunteer for the PASS organization, they are always looking for volunteers, and so you can go out to volunteer.sqlpass.org to learn more and to volunteer a bit yourself. Do something similar to what I'm doing here with hosting this virtual chapter. At this point, let's get into the presentation that we have here today. And as I mentioned already, our presenter is John Sterrett, and he'll be doing successfully migrating existing databases to Azure SQL Database. And John, I will hand it over to you here in just one moment.
Okay.
Let me make sure I click the right button. Attendees. There we go. There you go, John. You are now presenter.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Are you able to see my screen?
I am. And when you're ready for those polls, just let me know.
Okay. Will do for sure. Thank you, everyone, for making it out here tonight. And Jason, thank you for the great introduction. I've done a few migrations with existing databases out to Azure, and I just wanted to kind of share some of the lessons I've learned with everyone, so hopefully they don't maybe repeat some of the things that I've gone through. right. And now we're skipping slides. All right, so a little bit about me. I also am a virtual chapter leader. I actually run the High Availability and Disaster Recovery virtual chapter. I do a lot within the community, run the Austin local user group, do a lot with performance troubleshooting, virtualization, high availability. I've written a book with Tim Radney going over backup and recovery with 2014. Just this month I became an MVP. And if anybody wants to get a hold of me, you can do so at any of the Twitter, my blog, or even through email. So here's what we're going to go through with today. So one of the objectives we're going to kind of look at is Azure SQL Database a good viable solution for you? So we'll kind of look in and see, is this a way to where you can tap into features you may not have been able to before? So for example, I run into a lot of people at conferences, SQL Saturdays, user groups that I speak at, and they'll say, John, this is great stuff, but I only have standard edition. So Azure SQL Database is actually a way to tap into some of those enterprise edition features at a fraction of the cost. We're going to look at exactly testing for success. So how can we go about the testing process to make sure that we're actually going to be able to do the migration, that we can actually put our database out into Azure SQL databases? And then we'll talk about and look at a couple different ways to actually do the migration as well. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about performance. I know Jason has me coming back later, I believe in August, to cover performance in more of detail. But tonight I'm going to focus on some of the things that you're going to want to look at with performance as you're doing your migration, and probably shortly after, to make sure that your end users are happy. So the last thing you want to do when you do a migration in Azure is really give a bad taste in someone's mouth. I mean, first impression means a lot. So if it goes great, people are going to start to warm up to Azure and start to experience it and want to use it. But if you have a real hard time migrating and getting your databases over there, you're already giving people who may be doubting you already more to the fire to make them think that Azure isn't the best place. So why should we care? All right, as a DBA or IT professional, there's three cool things that can happen for you. One is you actually get access to Enterprise Edition features, like I mentioned. A lot of the Enterprise features have been there, and in fact, if you also like working with new stuff, this is where the product team actually tests functionality. So I think SQL Server 2016 is one of the best RTM builds because a lot of that code has been out in Azure SQL databases for quite a while being beaten up and tested. The other thing that could be very important, this is why I'm seeing more and more companies think about utilizing Azure, is because there's potential to save quite a bit of money here. But at the same time, if you migrate the wrong databases, it can actually end up costing you a lot of money. And we have a little cost-based analysis that I'll look at here a little later in the presentation as well. But Jason, I think this is kind of a great spot to maybe go over a couple of poll questions here. So I think the first poll question I would love to throw out there is just to kind of see who out there tonight or today, depending on where you are around the globe, is actually using SQL Azure databases today. I will let that go here for a few seconds.
Yeah, most people have voted, so I'll close the poll here for you.
All right. If you can't, go ahead and display the results there, Jason.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I'm
pretty sure it's there under that grouping, if you have the little pane for the poll.
There we go.
There we go. All right, so it looks like most people have, and very few haven't. Great. So the next curious question I'd like to ask is, who all has actually gone through and migrated an existing database out of the people that have used Azure? Or who are people that are basically creating new databases out there? All right, and kind of the same results there. So there's a mix. Pretty most of the people have gone out there and done this, so that's great. All right, and Chase, are you still able to see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. So looking at the basics of infrastructure, you have quite a few different options. So starting out, a lot of people who aren't in the cloud at all, they would be using kind of on-prem, everything all in their data center or multiple data centers that they have. And one of the great analogies here that I always kind of have whenever I do Azure talks is looking at it as pizza as a service. So kind of doing everything in your own environment would be making it at home. Where today we're kind of wanting to take our existing pizza that we've baked and cooked and we're going to take it over to the restaurant. So we're going to kind of flip over to software as a service to where we're going to migrate our existing database out there into the cloud to where Microsoft is going to take ownership of having it online and having it be up for you. Wow, my keyboard's flipping out here on me. So the next thing to look at to see if Azure is a good fit for you is looking at quite a bit of the features. So this is just a small little subset, and a lot of the new ones that you're seeing promoted by Microsoft a lot through their marketing channels. That's all there for you to use inside of Azure SQL Database. So for example, Query Store for performance. A lot of security features like row-level security, data masking is all there, always encryption. All these features, regardless of whether you're going to be using a basic, which is the smallest tier, or all the way up to premium, you can end up using all of these features in there. The one thing you want to focus on if you're going to be moving a database out to Azure that's already existing though is what features are not there in Azure for you to use. So what features may you be using today that aren't able to migrate across over into Azure because they don't exist? And once again, this is just a small subset of a lot of things that I've seen pop up that people start to question when they start thinking about moving a database over. For example, database mail, a SQL agent as an example, and cross queries is another good example as well. But here's a good list of exactly being able to access here all of those features that aren't available. And when we get to the demos here, I'm going to show you a couple ways on how you can go about actually doing testing to validate, so that way you can see if your schema is ready and is good to migrate on over.
And John, you got a question here regarding Azure SQL Database and whether it supports reporting services and integration services as services within there.
Reporting, so using reporting services out on a local box, hitting over to it as...
If there is a software as a service offering for those two features.
Oh, gotcha. So there is one I know for integrating data in and out. I believe it's called Data Factory. It's something I haven't experienced a whole lot myself yet.
Right.
On the reporting services, honestly, I'm not exactly sure on that one. I don't know if you may know,
yeah.
Jason. Or no.
Yeah, with both of those, for integration services, the closest you're going to get is going to be Data Factory, which is
right.
not exactly the same. And then for reporting platform, you're basically going to have Power BI. Is the software as a service offering there, I think, is how they're best marketing that. So.
Gotcha. Yep.
So that was the question. So.
Okay. So next we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at service tiers, because this is basically going to help you kind of figure out how much may it cost you to see if you're going to end up saving or not saving money. And so this is broken down. Basically, there's two different pricing models. One is your actual database. So if you just wanted a single database, you can pay per database, or you can also pay by pools as well, which would be basically a resource collection that you can have multiple databases in. So a couple things to note here, DTU, this is a metric that goes over performance, and it's basically a combination of either CPU, reads, or log writes. and it's going to be based out there on a number that it's going to give you. And a little later, I'm going to show you how you can actually see how that number is being able to be monitored through T-SQL. But also how much storage, so what's the max size that you can have of your database as well, and also how many connections in here as well. The one thing I always want to point out is people are going to move databases over. Being a person who runs the high availability disaster recovery virtual chapter, recovery is very important to me. And one thing to note here is the actual point-in-time restore that you have. So one thing that people may not see is they're moving something over. If you move to, say, premium tier to start to help make your migration go faster, as soon as you switch that down to standard, as an example, you also cut back the retention. So as you're switching your retention around, it's also, as you're switching, your service tiers around, that's going to end up going through and impacting your actual recovery point objective of how long you can recover from as well. All right, and here we're looking at the elastic pools here. So instead of a single database, this is actually going through and showing you here a collection of resources that could be used between databases here. So very similar breakout that you saw for databases, except now this is just covering a pool. So what's the elastic DTU pool? So what's the total amount that could be used by the whole pool as an example, instead of just DTU per database? But you also have limits there per database as well. All right, the next thing to focus on is support. Are you going to be able to get the support that you want out of Azure in order to migrate your database over there? And they kind of have 4 tiers, and I like to think of them as, developer is, this is something, maybe I'm building a proof of concept or a brand new application. I don't actually need mission critical support. So it's actually pretty affordable there at only $30 a month there, but it shows you that could be a good entry level for non-production support over there. And from there it goes on up. Where if your business is going to be dependent upon Azure, that's where you're going to want to really look at premium support or professional direct support. So going over connectivity, another limit factor there is through SQL authentication or Azure Active Directory. And here's a little cost comparison. So for example, for one client that I've had just recently, I helped them true up on some hardware. And we've kind of gone over and we spec'd out exactly, what would be a good fit for them looking at some Dell servers here. And basically, there's kind of 2 scenarios. One where, they need a second server if they're going to actually have high availability. So we'll show that at 2. And then there's the bottom one before, which would show like if they wanted an availability group scenario where they were going to have 4 servers but have one just for DR purposes. So that way they're not paying for the licensing with software assurance. The main thing I wanted to point out here is you can kind of get a breakdown of what it would cost just outright to buy the licensing and the servers. I don't have any numbers in here for support and power because obviously that's going to vary a lot when you're managing everything yourself. But then I also break it down so you can see what it's like for a 5 or 10 year scenario. Then in the bottom right corner, what I'm doing here is I'm kind of showing you, what would the price calculator inside of Azure show you if you wanted to have one of those elastic pools where you're in premium and you're at 250 DTUs. You can see that that's going to cost you, total, and even if you want standard support over there, about 20K. So you can see if you're in this environment where you can fit inside of the DTU limits there from the 250, you can end up saving quite a bit of money to where you would basically have to use the hardware for over 10 years to get close to the break-even point, which not a whole lot of critical tier 1 databases are doing that. So first, there's another example of doing the DTU at the highest level for an elastic pool there, which is the 1500 there. So even there you kind of see we're kind of breaking out if we were going to do this all internally and we're going to have the 4 servers. You're breaking right around at the 5-year point there. And I also break out what it would be if you're going to do the highest tier there for a single database as well. So where this can multiply for you and end up being not cost efficient is if you don't really fit your databases well into these tiers and you need multiples of them. So like for example, if you were going to go a single database route here and you needed to support 10 databases that were critical tier 1 that wouldn't fit well in these elastic pools and you wanted to go that route, then paying a whole lot more than what it would be to probably run on the hardware locally.
And
so
John,
once again, this, yeah.
And John, we got a question here regarding migrating between premium and standard.
Okay.
When you're migrating between standard, premium and standard, and the recovery point goes from 21 days down to 14 days, does that extra availability disappear right away, or does it age itself out?
Good question. My understanding is it disappears right away. So as soon as you cut that over and you're able to use it, you would not be able to recover past the 14 days there if you went from premium down to standard.
Cool, thank you.
All right, so how do you guys migrate databases today? Jason, this would be a great time to throw up that poll question. So the one that I had over there over migrating existing databases.
All right, 1 second. Here we go.
So yeah, we've got quite a few different options here. You know, the standard detach and attach, backup and restore, or do an ETL where either you're using the import-export wizard or building out the script and then using SSIS. Database mirroring, which is one of my personally favorites that I used way back quite a ways, and then availability groups as well, and log shipping is another one there.
All right, I'll close this one and share it out.
All right, cool, yeah. And looks like a lot of people are using backup and restores, which is what I would expect, and also good to see that mirroring or availability groups is there as well. This makes me think for most of you, the downtime or the time it would take to complete the migration from the end user's perspective is probably pretty important. So with that, Jason, go ahead, let's go ahead and ask that question. So we had another poll question in there for how much downtime do you normally have to complete a migration for a critical database? So for example, less than 5 minutes, meaning it has to be pretty quick, or 5 minutes to an hour to 6 hours. I mean, I've actually had a couple of clients where they're like, yeah, it's on the weekend, we could take the whole weekend, which is nice, but I know that's not a possibility for a lot of people out there as well. So I'm kind of curious to see what constraints you guys have. So 5 minutes to an hour is the most we're seeing there. 75% of y'all are saying that, and then the other 25% is all day. So this is good because even with Azure now, this is going to kind of impact what tool or tools you're going to end up using for your migration. So for example, the only one that will give you as close to real-time, little downtime, is actually one of my good old friends, transactional replication, which hopefully we'll get into a little bit later here. But basically when you're migrating to Azure, so it's going to be different. For example, there is no command that you can write in T-SQL to do a backup. It's all going to be done under the hood for you. So if you want to actually migrate an existing database over at some shape or form, you're basically going to have to get the schema and the data over there to be the migration. So there's quite a few different options of doing that, which we're going to talk about. All right, so migrating over. There's basically 3 steps. The first one is to test. So you really don't want to be in a scenario where you're going to actually migrate database, especially if you have a low amount of downtime, and have an experience of a lot of unknown things. It's going to make your upgrade pretty hard and tough. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go over testing. This image here, it's taken from the good documentation over there on Azure. And there's quite a few different ways on how you can do this. But the best one by far from my experience is actually Visual Studio data tools, building out a new project there, and we're going to go over exactly how to do that. But basically you would go through there, find out what stops you have, end up fixing those, then go ahead and migrate out and test. And then from there you can have your plan, and then when it's time to do your migration, you can go ahead and perform the migration. All right, so what tools can we use to validate an existing database to see if your database needs changes and identify what those changes are? There's a couple of tools like the SQL Server 2016 Upgrade Advisor, which if anyone hasn't checked that out yet, I recommend you do it. It looks quite a bit different than what you're probably used to from seeing it in the past. And one of the fun features in there is to actually look at a database to see if it can be upgraded over to Azure SQL Databases. So another one that you can use is the Export Data Tier app wizard within Management Studio. But the two that I think I recommend and I have the best experiences with is SQL Package, which is an executable that will be installed if you install SQL Server or Visual Studio out on your boxes. The next one there is SQL Server Data Tools inside of Visual Studio. We're definitely going to go through an example of doing that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into our demo. All right. So I'm going to hop into a VM I have here. And I don't know if my box needs more coffee or not, but it is not wanting to move. All right, so the very first tool that we're going to go ahead and look at here is actually Upgrade Advisor. So as I mentioned, this looks probably quite a bit different if you've never looked at it before. And nice component that we have in here is Migrate to Azure SQL Database. So the very first thing we're going to end up doing over here is selecting a server. All right. And then we're going to tell it to go ahead and connect over here. And this is going to allow us to pick the database that we would want to do our analysis against. So I'm going to go ahead and pick over here this AdventureWorks Lite, just so we can get things done here in a quick amount of time here for our demo. We're going to go ahead and tell it select, and then tell it to run. And it's going to go through and probe the schema here. And it's going to let us know what things need to be fixed, if anything it thinks needs to be fixed. So the interesting thing here, which I'm going to point out to you, it's going to say issues to covered 0. This doesn't actually guarantee you that this thing is prime time ready and there's nothing you need to do. I'm actually going to use another tool here which is going to show us that we actually have some security in here that's not going to be able to migrate over. But here we have no issues, and it's going to let you go ahead and even script out the whole schema here. So if you wanted to, you could save this out as a script, run this over in your new database that you're going to create out in Azure, and then you can go ahead and import your data over there. All right, so now I want to go ahead and take a look at SQL Package itself. So like I mentioned, SQL Package is an actual executable out here that basically has a couple of commands we can use. So we could use it to export or import, and as part of the exporting, it's actually going to validate the schema for you. And if it detects everything, then it's going to stop you there and not allow you to move forward. So in this case here, if I can grab my mouse, wow. So what I wanted to do here is run our line 7, where basically I'm telling it, go ahead and we're going to do an export. I'm going to connect to my local instance here, which is the JSVM. If I can pull my mouse, there we go. It's going to connect to that AdventureWorks Lite 2012 database, and it's going to export out what's known as a backpack, which this is basically going to be a container in here that's going to have our schema in here. And here it's giving me errors because we have replication that's out here that's blocking it. So this I actually was not expecting here. But because is replication is not supported out there, that definitely makes sense. So I should have cleaned up this demo and pulled out all of my replication stuff out of here. But the best tool by far for going through and actually doing a migration of an existing database is using Visual Studio data tools. So for example, here I'm going to fire up Visual Studio. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and use the Surfer Object Explorer here so I can connect to my local database. And then I'm going to create a new project here that will actually then allow me to build a project inside of Visual Studio here that we're going to be able to validate a schema against. So for here, I'm going to go over to create new project. And then here, I'm just going to go ahead and type cloud, if it will let me grab it. Wow. Yeah, sorry everyone, looks like my computer here is going crazy. Alright, well, we're going to go ahead and keep that way. I'll just create a new directory for the solution here. And then we're going to go ahead and create the project out. So this should take a few seconds, but what this is basically going to do is it's going to go through and export all of the objects that I have inside of the database and include it inside of a Visual Studio project. So when I click Finish here, and I go over to my Solution Explorer, we'll now see that I have my Cloud VC project here with all of my schema. So everything's there. So for example, I'll have my tables, stored procedures, and everything there. But to test this for the migration, what we're going to want to do is actually go to the properties here of the actual project. And the reason why we're doing this is because there's actually a target platform in here that we could switch, and we can actually tell it to use Microsoft Azure SQL Databases here. So this is how it could go through and validate the schema. Now I wish they had V13 out here because now if you create a new database, it's going to be in V13, which would be similar compatibility to 2016. But here we can go ahead and we can save this. And now if we go through and we actually build our project, it's going to go ahead and go out and validate it for us. All right, so let me right click here. And now we're going to tell it to build. And so right off the bat here, we're going to have a couple of errors here. And for example, you're not going to be allowed to move security that's not SQL authenticated security over. So if you have any Windows accounts, this is actually going to show up and red flag you. So a good thing to point out here was using the upgraded advisor, we didn't have anything flagged. When we actually went through and we used even SQL package, it gave some replication warnings, but if that wasn't there, it would have gone through and it would have popped up with this error as well. But the nice thing about this wonderful tool here, Visual Studio Data Tools, this is going to give us a good look into all of them that come up. And this obviously is just Visual Studio here, or I'm sorry, AdventureWorks Lite. So it's pretty well formed. If I wanted to, I can easily go back to my solution here, go to the security, and comment it out, and we can rebuild, and then we'd be fine, and if we wanted to, we could go ahead and deploy. That's it, because my computer is acting up. I wanted to run this again with another database I had out there where I manually added some code that I knew wouldn't be deployable. Let me just see if I can pull that up, because the way how the computer is going tonight. All right, so here's my test one. So here's another project. And one thing I wanted to show you here is we have those same things, same login with the network service that we can pull out of there. But we also got some pretty interesting warnings of some objects that you can't use out there in Azure. So for example, trying to access the file levels itself, you can't do that out there in Azure. So this reference over here is a warning that could be a showstopper that you'd want to address. Same thing with looking at sys processes over there as well. So this could be a pretty cool tool to help you with actually migrating or starting the testing process to validate what things in your schema would block you from migrating over to Azure. Any questions, Jason, that came in from the testing portion to see some of the tools that are available and how you can leverage them to help you?
No questions, but there was a comment regarding the Azure Migration Wizard on Codeplex. That does pretty much the same as what the upgraded advisor for 2016 does. It also, if you weren't aware, brings in some data as well.
Okay.
The data.
Nice.
Which I've used that before too. It's a pretty slick tool.
Yes. Yeah. So right now I'm covering just the testing point, but yeah, you can use a lot of these tools to migrate as well. So the SQL package, which we'll get into, once you build it and you have your valid schema, it'll build a backpack that you can deploy. Or, so with Visual Studio, if you wanted to deploy this out once you had a good standing, no errors in here, it would just give the schema. So if you didn't have much data, you could use data compare, which may be nice for a real small database, but not a real good option for actually bigger size databases, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here as well. All right, so yeah, and this isn't even the VM that I'm in out in Azure. This is my local machine that's just sucking tonight. And it was fine about an hour ago. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, clicked on the full screen here, so hopefully it will go full screen. There we go. All right, so we talked about migration options. So these are things that you can actually use for migrating over. So once you validated you got a good schema, there's Migration Wizard just built right into Management Studio, which is pretty awesome for really small databases. You can also, once again, use your backpack. So the backpack's just a nice fancy way of collecting the schema and the actual data inside of the database at that point in time. And I kind of showed you how you can export out with SQL package, and it's pretty same for importing into an Azure database as well. You also have PowerShell, and if you have a backpack, you can even use the Azure portal to do it. Now, if you have a tight timeline on the amount of time that you can actually have for your migration, this is where transactional replication can be a good friend for you, especially with bigger databases. Because I'm going to go into some numbers of what it took for me to migrate a 60 gig database, which actually just was the Stack Overflow copy, just to kind of give me a good non-neutral database that had some nice size to it. But with transactional replication, ahead of time, you can actually push the data over from whether it's a VM out in Azure, or if this is your local data center and you've set up security so it can send the data out, you could do it in advance, and while you're changing data out in production, all that data is going to be changed over on the fly. And of course, you also have your deploy schema and data transfer as well. All right. Is it? Once again, the computer. Not. Oh. All right. So migrating a SQL package. Here's just a good example of exactly what it would look like here if you're going to use the SQL package to go ahead and migrate out. So basically what we attempted to do there in the first part, we did the export. So we create the backpack, and then once you have that, and you have a database that's created out there, you can then use this to push the data out. All right, so here's just a little experience from me trying to get that 60 gig stack overflow database out. So I tried this originally with S0 because, you know, I wanted to be cost effective. I wanted to make my Azure dollars stretch, and I said, we'll give it a good try. So it looks there like this maybe was a day of activity, but that end where you see it go back down, that's actually me giving up. And the reason why is because I'm looking at the rows of data as this is being populated, and it's nowhere near being close to be completed. In fact, if you actually look at the graph here, you're going to see I actually switch from S0, which limits you at 10 DTUs, over to 20, and it still wasn't really helping me. So, being a DBA who loves performance tuning and has a lot of good scripts, I told myself, hey, why don't we take a peek and see what's going on under the hood here? And so here's a pretty good example of me just running something similar to like SV Who's Active by Adam Mechanic. It's just my little query that I run to see what's going on right now. And here's what I noticed. Almost all the queries that we're running are waiting on log rate governor. And what this means is basically I'm throttled. I'm trying to write more than what I paid for. So it's throttling me back down to keep me within the SLAs that I decided to go with. So a good lesson here is even if you're going to keep your database at a lower tier, you're probably going to want to upgrade it to a premium tier for the actual migration portion so that can go as fast as possible. And then once that's done, you can lower that back down. But I mean, here's just a perfect example where every single process that's running, except for one that's being blocked, it's all being throttled by the log rate governor. All right, so I tried this again. I said, all right, let's do this at P1 here. So this, I could see it going through, and it's had points at the max there of my DTU, but quite a bit where it's not, where it took me close to around a day for this to end up completing. So the main point there that I wanted to point before I jump over to our demo is that unless you have quite a bit of time to migrate an existing database, you definitely are going to want to use your fastest tier that you can, and you may want to start looking into transactional replication too, because that's the way we can get close to a real-time migration with bigger sets of data, because all the data movement is happening mainly before you're doing the actual migration, and then we're just going to sync up the changes that you need once you're getting ready to do the migration. And so with that, we'll take a quick look here over an example of migrating an existing database. All right, so I'm going to go back over, if my mouse will let me. If my mouse will let me. There, we're starting next call. All right, so let me put the Azure VM here in full screen. All right, if I go to Management Studio here, so there's quite a few options for you to move databases. So the easiest by far would be for us to just go ahead and use Management Studio. And this can actually be a pretty good case if your databases are very small. So for example, if I go ahead and right click over here, I can tell it to go to Tasks, and then down here, we're going to say Deploy Database to Microsoft SQL, Azure SQL Database. So in here we'll have our nice little wizard that'll walk us through it, and basically this is going to create a backpack for you behind the scenes. So what this is doing is still pretty similar over here. And I'm going to tell it where I want this to go. Specify the target. So here I'm going to go ahead and I have my Azure SQL Database server in there. And if my keyboard would actually function. Wow. Let's see if it will at least let me delete them out. Hopefully I'll have better luck on the password. And we'll try to connect over here. So what this is going to do for us is basically it'll allow us to create our new database. So we could specify exactly what tier we want. All right, there. And then it's going to create the backpack, and then it's going to migrate it over for us. So try to connect, and now it's not liking the password. Once again, I apologize. This is technology demoed gods getting in the way here of not wanting my keyboard to type the characters I'm putting in. Wow. All right, we'll give that a try. That looks about right. Connect over there. All right, well, apparently I should not run my desktop as if it was its own server, because the keyboard is not liking me at all right now. But basically what this would do is allow you to go ahead and select the tier over there, and then it'll create the backport. In fact, let me see if I can cancel this and show you. So yeah, there we'd be able to actually select the database that we would want and the new name that we would want to give it, and it would connect through over there and allow us to specify the exact tier that we would want. So once again, I strongly encourage using a higher performance tier for the migration at least, just so you have the resources to allow you to go a lot faster, and then you can bring that down once that's done. But keep in mind here that, you know, obviously because you're doing this as the migration point, it won't impact you as much, but that will change your recovery point objective to how long you can recover as well. So with that, let me hop back over to the PowerPoint. If my computer will let me. Hey Jason, while I'm switching this over, were there any questions? My computer looks like it's dying on me.
Nope, no questions in the queue right now.
Okay. All right, there, we're getting closer. All right, so going back over to the PowerPoint here. So hopefully wrap this up here. All right, so what tier is actually best for you? And the answer here is the good answer to almost every single SQL Server question. It depends. The nice thing that's out here, though, is there's a DTU calculator that you can use to kind of get a good estimate of a starting point for you. So what this ends up doing is it's actually going to go through, and there's a little command line that you can click on that will give you a PowerShell script that will basically allow you to collect perfmon for an hour with these few collectors. So it'll let you know how much processor is being used, how many reads and writes, and your log byte flushes. So these are the things that it's going to use to help you kind of figure out what DTU area you should start out with. So from here, you would run that PowerShell script that you click on the link there. You would run it, and then you would input how many cores are on your box, and then you would upload the CSV file that it would generate. So here's just one example here of some results. If I had more time, I would show you the details in here of looking at a database that may not be a good fit for Azure that's way over the DTUs that are provided on the P11. Oh, and also look at a small one and look at all the details that you can look at within the report. It's a pretty cool tool to have in your tool bag of tools to help you with getting started. Like I said, due to time here, we're going to go ahead and skip through that. Now, maintenance is another thing, whether you're migrating or even using a new database. Some people think you could just kind of set them and forget them with all of the platform as a service databases. Well, here's an actual example of me working with a client here where they actually had some corruption. And they didn't hear anything at all from their vendor. This actually was Amazon that they were using. But just through the application log, they were able to see that, oh, we have a blob here that's throwing stack dumps. And to me, that could be causing corruption. To me, the most important thing is the actual number of stack dumps. If you look here, there was over 6,000 of them, and they never heard a single word from their provider. So you definitely can't just put your database out here and completely forget about it. So some good maintenance that you would want to do. Backups is done for you if you want to use or restore out to Azure. If you ever want to have the ability to restore your database out of Azure, this is where you would use SQL package or some other tool to build a backpack for you. But your index maintenance, stat maintenance, Ola Halogrid, which is one of the best solutions I've seen out there in the open source community, it works just fine. I've used it with quite a few clients of mine that are out there in Azure. And of course, you can set proactive alerts as well. So to automate, there's no SQL agent, but you can always use a link server connection from an instance that does have SQL agent, or you can use PowerShell, or there's a couple of Azure tools as well, like the Azure Elastic Jobs. But one of the nice things that's out here is automated alerts. So for example, if your DTU is hitting your bottleneck point of what you have, kind of like what I showed you in the early examples when I tried to take my Stack Overflow database and use S0 tier to move it over, you can set this up so that you're not alerted. So for example, one of the options that it can do is send you out an email, but you can actually even have this take some actions like run a PowerShell script for you as well if you want to. So briefly here talking just a little bit about performance. So here's an example of me looking at DTU as part of the migration process itself. So this is me even upgraded just the LT database. So if you actually go through Azure Portal and look at the graphs, you're just going to see DTU or percentage of DTU. You can actually use T-SQL over here to look at the details, because how it's calculating DTU is it's just basically taking the max of your percentage and multiplying it by your DTU limit to factor out the DTU used. So for example here, even though my log write is pretty low, where when I actually was migrating Stack Overflow, this was my huge bottleneck. It's going to take the max out of any one of those percents. So whether it's CPU, log, or memory as well, it's going to take the highest value there, and it's going to use that to calculate the threshold out there. So for example, we can see CPU is almost 100 there. Our DTU limit is 20, so you can see that right there we're at, almost at 20. So the next thing that I want to focus on here as part of your migration to help you is look at the weights. So the weights are one of our best friends with out-of-the-box SQL Server. We can actually use it with Azure as well. In fact, we can look at the DMVs to look at this inside of your database and also the host instance itself. But I would mainly just focus on your database because that's where you're going to have a little bit of control. So once again here I'm just showing you a couple time slices where I'm seeing that log rate governor is my big pain in my butt here, so for this to move data in, this is a good scenario of explaining why you may want a higher performance tier to get the data in. All right, and quickly showing, I'm going to cover a lot of these in a lot more detail in its own performance session in I think in a month or two. But there's Query Store, which is a great graphical interface. Gosh, if you haven't seen it. In fact, the way how I figured out the T-SQL for calculating DTU was actually using Query Store itself. I had it running out there on a database I wasn't using yet, and just being curious, I was kind of poking around, and little behold, I found a query there that basically goes through and calculates out DTU. But also, if you want to have insight into performance throughout the migration without actually getting into Management Studio or the database, you can use Performance Insight as well.
And John, a quick question that came through regarding the DTU and DTU calculator. The DTU calculator works at the server level. Is there an easy way to split that down to a per database level?
So that is a good question. And for that, what I would do, I would attempt this. I'll tell you what, I love this question because it's something I didn't think of originally myself that I'll blog about. But I know for the log, so the log is per database, although it's doing it by total. So I'm pretty sure that you could probably flip that over to the database you're focused on. So that way you can focus that part of it based on your database. But CPU and other stuff like that, that's going to be per the server.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Nope, no other questions right now.
Awesome. All right, well, here are some, like I said, helpful links there. And I apologize there for my wonderful machine here. I was hoping to actually go through a little bit more, but it didn't want to cooperate too much tonight. But with that, Jason, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
All right, sounds good. And thanks, John, for the presentation here tonight. And thanks, everyone, for attending. This we'll conclude our meeting here tonight because we've gone through all the questions. We got a couple thank yous for you, John, in the comments. And thanks, everyone, for attending, and see you next week.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep, thanks. Bye, all.